The way we design the 1.2 test suite is basically kind of like an exploration of the order space, the n-dimensional order space of Seaport orders. It's kind of a constraint satisfaction problem where, various features in this n-dimensional order space are valid depending on other features. And I remembered I did take a class where I learned about that in college.
In this episode, we talk with James, otherwise known as emo.eth, who is a smart contract dev and a core contributor to Seaport, which is a protocol built by OpenSea but used by a ton of different NFT marketplaces in the space. Kevin, I'm curious what stood out to you in this conversation.
Yeah, this was great. James had a really good way of diving super deep and then coming back up for air and making sure that it was understandable. We talked about the moving pieces within Seaport. We talked about the role that OpenSea has setting standards. We talked about Harberger taxes and royalties. We really went across the gambit on this one. Was there anything that stuck out for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation lately around intents-based architecture and what should live off-chain and what should live on-chain. And we touched a little bit on that within Seaport and outside of it. So I think this is a really good, very comprehensive conversation across a bunch of different topics. But I think we had a really great amount of depth on each one of them. So let's hop into the show. I hope you guys enjoy as much as we enjoyed recording it. We are here with James on the internet, known as emo.eth, who is a smart contract dev working on Seaport. James, super excited to have you on the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat some nerdy stuff, GM.
Yes. Can't wait to get into Seaport and all of the things. But before we do that, can you give a little bit of context on how you got into crypto and what the hell brought you here in terms of just where you are in the space today?
Yeah, sure. Crypto's always been kind of on the periphery for me. Had friends in high school who were, doing things on certain websites that might rhyme with Milk Road that were very excited about this fancy technology called Bitcoin. And I didn't really get it at the time, but they were very excited about it. And my brother actually, I think, got into it pretty early. He was mining Bitcoin before there were mining pools, apparently. Not that he held on to that the whole time. So it's always kind of been there and been on the periphery. And I've always taken an interest in it very casually. And I think once ERC-20s took off, I didn't get those. And once NFTs started taking off, that was the first time where things started to click. Oh, you have this digital money, but now you also have digital things. Maybe that is a good use case for this digital money. Maybe programmatic tokens make sense in this context. So I started learning more about NFTs, was exposed to OpenSea and all that. So I've been at OpenSea today actually is my 2 years at OpenSea. Exactly.
Congratulations.
So yeah, thank you.
Wow, that's exciting. Happy 2-year anniversary. I think
Thank you.
One of the things that you've been working on at OpenSea is Seaport, which I definitely want to dive into. Maybe you can at first give sort of a broad, high-level overview of why Seaport was developed in the first place. Prior, OpenSea was on a different protocol, so maybe we can talk about that, and then we can talk about what Seaport actually looks like from an architecture perspective.
Yeah. Why Seaport? Seaport was developed for probably several reasons. Zero Age is the mastermind behind the V1 and a lot of the architecture decisions there. Before Seaport, OpenSea was using a protocol called Wyvern and was kind of the only major user of this protocol that I'm aware of. And Wyvern was interesting. It was there to build on at the time, and that's why Devin and Alex built on it. And it served OpenSea well for a while, but it's almost too flexible, almost too powerful to a dangerous extent sometimes. There was a bug disclosed eventually that was patched, but it was just insanely complex for no good reason and very inefficient. And OpenSea was growing, had a lot of new use cases. We wanted to support things like collection offers or trait offers and not use a ton of gas trying to fulfill transactions. Wyvern, you even had to deploy a proxy just to get started, which could cost $200 at the top of the bowl.
Would you say that Wyvern was over abstracted?
Probably. I don't. Yes, I get it now. Very good.
Please continue.
But yeah, so Seaport came from wanting something more powerful, wanting something safer, and just wanted to move the space forward, ideally.
I think that the whole thing around having way too much complexity is really interesting. And I feel like probably in the space over the last few years, we've sort of gotten to the point where we actually know what needs to happen in these protocols. And so we're able to get much more specific and also ideally optimize for gas. So at a sort of broad level, at maybe 1,000 feet, what does Seaport actually look like? What is the architecture of Seaport?
Yeah, sure thing. I will back up and say that it's not like Seaport's simple at all. It's an incredibly intimidating code base. We had to pull out all the stops just to get it to compile to be deployed on EVM networks because it's right up against the smart contract size limit. So it's very, very complicated. But Wyvern is complex in that it doesn't really care what you do with it. Whereas Seaport, it knows that you're trying to exchange tokens for other tokens. And so that's a good starting point for a token settlement protocol. High level Seaport, it's primarily an off-chain marketplace. I don't love to use the word marketplace with Seaport because that makes it sound like you're just selling NFTs for tokens, and it does a lot more than that. It primarily uses off-chain signatures, which is nice. There's some protocols that are entirely on-chain, like the Zora protocols, and there are some that are entirely off-chain, like I think Blur V1 may have been entirely off-chain. Seaport's an interesting hybrid where you can post orders to the chain and fulfill them. That's how Party DAO was doing their party auctions for a while. You'd spin up a DAO and it would post an order on chain, which is pretty cool. Seaport also has this kind of tandem concept of something called a conduit, which is designed to make token approvals portable. So Seaport handles all of the order processing logic. It says, yes, this order is valid, but when it comes time to actually move tokens, you can either specify Seaport moves the tokens or it offloads the job to a smart contract called a conduit. And that's useful for all kinds of things because, when we deployed a brand new protocol, we didn't want any show-stopping bugs. So conduits allow channels like Seaport to move tokens around. Or if we upgrade a version of Seaport, which we've done a few times this year, it allows us to move on from the old version of Seaport without having to onboard everyone again by having to approve tokens, which is pretty fun.
So I like the hybrid approach, and we got to interview Horsefax a little bit, and we got into a pretty cool conversation about a sufficient decentralization. And so it kind of reminds me of that, and just the idea of really only putting on chain the necessary bits and then keeping off chain the kind of unnecessary bits. So can you talk a little bit about how the distinction was made around what needs to be on chain 100% versus what we can get away with being off chain?
One thing that needs to be on chain, or I guess doesn't need to be on chain, but supporting smart contracts that want to buy or sell tokens. If it's a 1271 style wallet, I guess you can submit an order that was made off chain with a signature that the 1271 compatible contract will validate as part of order fulfillment. But if you don't have that, if you're just a smart contract that wants to put something out there, a smart contract can call directly into Seaport, validate its own order, and then as part of fulfillment, you don't need to supply any kind of signature, whether it's a 1271 signature or a normal wallet signature. And that's nice for supporting that use case. Also, sufficient at decentralization, as you mentioned. You don't have to rely on an off-chain order book like, the OpenSea API or the Reservoir API. You can post an order for everyone to see, whether that's MEV searchers or, other protocols.
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful. In terms of the major moving pieces within Seaport, you have this idea of token owners, I'm not sure what the label is, and people that are willing to make offers. You have this concept of conduits. Can you sort of illustrate the high-level actors in this marketplace? Totally. And then maybe start to dive into each of those?
Yeah. So the main invariant that Seaport wants to enforce is that Seaport will never try to move a token that an offerer has not explicitly included in an order as an offer item, we call them, and it won't try to move more tokens than is specified by the order. So an order has an offerer, I guess a maker is the more traditional term, has offer items, which is what is being offered. And it also has a concept of consideration items, which I don't even know the real traditional finance term for it, but consideration item is a token tied to a recipient, and the recipient doesn't have to be the offerer. That's how things like fees, marketplace fees, get included in orders. You say, I want 10 ether to be fulfilled, and 2.5% goes to whoever. There's a more esoteric concept on these orders called a zone, which are very powerful, very abstract. I think there's still questions around the design space there. A zone is an authorized party on an order that can cancel an order, it can directly fulfill an order, or it can approve yes or no that an order is valid. And so zones are still something we're tinkering with that are, to me, very exciting, but still a lot of pain points just in terms of documentation and tooling around it. We use zones for like our collection offers. We have a signed zone where you need a server-side signature, which is a bit unfortunate, but this is primarily for collection offers where, if someone has their account phished or hacked, a lot of times the phisher will try to dump NFTs into collection bids. And, our backend says, does this NFT look like it was stolen? If no, then here's the signature. If it does look like it's stolen, then that's a way of protecting the innocent people who just said, I want any NFT from this collection.
On that note, I'm curious, it sounds like zones add new types of constraints to the protocol that optimally would be programmable. In sort of a broad sense, do you think that type of mechanic is going to be more common in protocol design moving forward? And I'm curious, you mentioned the design space being so big. I mean, how constrained do these things need to be for developers to be able to use them? And how abstract is too abstract, basically?
Yeah. Definitely. I think we are seeing that. I think Uniswap B4 hooks, Uniswap X hooks, CowSwap. These are all basically intent protocols, is the buzzword folks like to throw around. Zones are fun in that they're particularly expressive. There are a wide variety of constraints you can place on an order being fulfilled or like the data that gets passed to the zone. But basically, a zone can make an assertion about what the state of the chain is after all fulfillments have taken place as part of a Seaport fulfillment. Not just a single order, but like multiple orders. The zone applies to one particular order, but currently the validate order hook that gets called on zones happens after all executions and fulfillments. So you can make pretty expressive and safe assertions about the state of the chain afterward, which, that's what an intent is, or so they say, which I think is very exciting.
Can you give like a hard example of what someone might do with that flexibility?
Yeah, so we just put out a couple of EIPs around like dynamic traits and redeemables, which kind of ties into dynamic traits. The thing about dynamic on-chain metadata, especially if they're traits that can be redeemed, like has this airdrop been claimed, or maybe, I don't know, you staked a token and there's rewards, I don't know.
Yeah, I actually, for permissionless hackathon, I actually used the new 7498 NFT redeemables standard. Shout out to Ryan Godes for helping me out with that. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so if you see this NFT, it has this airdrop associated with it, or some metadata that's like rare. It has a rare item equipped, and you're like, hey, I want this token. You put an offer on the token. The owner of the token can redeem the airdrop. They can unequip the rare item and then sell it to you. And what a zone can do is say, this order is only valid if this trade is still unredeemed, if it still has some quality, if this registry of airdrops says that this token is still valid. That was one of the big changes from Seaport 1.1 to we jumped kind of straight to 1.5. The zones were not as expressive. They had a stateless call before order fulfillment, which made it very difficult to, make sure that things like unequipping or redeeming didn't happen as part of fulfillment, which is very tricky. So we moved it to the end. So working on the Redeemables standard, the dynamic trait standard, as part of that, we're designing, a zone where you can make assertions about these traits or redeemable qualities as part of order creation and fulfillment.
Yeah, I think there's a really cool conversation I want to get into around the way that OpenSea is shaping standards. But before I do, closing the loop on sufficient decentralization. So we've talked a little bit about the actors, the structures that make up Seaport. Now, it sounds as though the majority of that complexity lives off chain. Ultimately, you just have like a final signature from the owner that can be passed around. And so what's the part that is on chain? Just the execution at the end, or?
I mean, so not only do you need the signature, you need the rest of the order to construct the digest to validate against the signature. What happens on chain is the order hash is marked as used, tokens are moved. What else needs to be on chain? And there are bulk cancellations through counters. I feel like I'm missing a part of your question though, so feel free to try to expand.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is helpful. It's essentially like you have this potentially complicated structure object of an order, which, let's say I'm listing an NFT. I am willing to accept any number of these 10 tokens in various amounts. You are someone who is looking to buy an NFT and you are willing to offer any number of tokens with any amounts. And so you have this kind of like complicated handshake. And like once those two like actors connect, then you can sort of execute the order on chain. But up until that point, because you're choosing not to store everything on chain as its own sort of object, the way that, like, for example, Uniswap, you have your LP position in the form of an NFT that you can then go like do other stuff with. It sounds more like the approach here is you have this kind of complicated order object off chain. And then when it's time to actually execute on it, only then do you drop it down on chain.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case, unless you want to validate it on chain for whatever reason, like I mentioned with 1271 signatures or smart contracts that want to do their own order management.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. It's interesting. We talk a lot about, over the last few podcasts, we've had a lot of conversations about what's on chain and what's off chain. And I think the rise of intense-based architectures are sort of forcing some of that as well. You mentioned redeemables and playing around with some of that stuff and how you're sort of shaping architecture around that as well. I'm curious more broadly what types of NFT standards you've been thinking about, because it feels like this is sort of an ever-evolving type of thing.
Yeah, definitely ever evolving. I think there's still a lot that Seaport can do to support new standards or be flexible while still in an agnostic way. Something that we thought about but didn't include for Seaport 1.5 is that I think it'd be really great if zones had a pre-hook as well as a post-hook for a number of reasons. You could do things like authorize token transfers before they're actually moved and then validate that they were moved how you thought they were going to be moved without having to bake something into Seaport itself that can be left up to the token. I'm really interested in Harberger taxes and just new kinds of models for tokens, subscriptions, things like that. Harberger subscriptions. These are just things that I've been thinking about that, to me feel kind of underserved and underexplored, that I think Seaport plays really well with, or can play really well with. Another thing that was introduced in the newer version of Seaport is this concept of a contract offerer, which is more than like 1271 smart contract signatures authorizing orders. They're kind of reactive orders that are smart contracts. You say, I want to spend this much token to get these tokens, and then the smart contract will say, yes, I can do that within these parameters and modify the order in a way that's safe. And then it's its own AMM, basically. You could build Uniswap liquidity pools using Seaport contract offers if you wanted to. Things like that, like especially with Harberger taxes, tokens that can be their own market makers, I think are exciting.
Let's talk a little bit about Harberger taxes. For people who are not familiar, can you give just like the TLDR on what Harberger taxes are in the first place?
Sure. I'll do my best. I've mostly digested this through like third-hand sources and have probably put my own spin on it. But the most classic example is like a land value tax, where you want land to be used efficiently. So you put a self-assessed tax on land. You say, I think this land is worth $1 million because I want to build a factory here that makes stuff. You pay a tax based on your self-assessed value. So if you say it's worth $1, you pay a tax based on $1. The idea, though, is compulsory sales. So if you say it's worth $1, anyone can buy it from you for $1. If you say it's worth $1 million because you think you can be productive with the land, you pay a tax based on $1 million, anyone can buy it from you for $1 million, which is, maybe more reasonable. If someone else thinks that this land is worth $2 million, if they think they can be productive with it to the tune of $2 million or whatever the tax is, then they can come buy it from you, pay a tax on $2 million, and then see if that works out. The idea here is that capital, in this case, is allocated efficiently in terms of how productive you can be with it. This is very abstract generally, and maybe translates in weird ways to blockchain technology, especially NFTs today. I think it's a really hard sell for collectibles or PFPs. Maybe it doesn't make sense there. And I think that's partly why it hasn't super caught on. Because, why would you buy a PFP that anyone can buy from you at any other points? There's also this concept of recurring. It's kind of like a subscription, which is why I mentioned subscriptions as well. But I think there are other models you can do with it.
Yeah, I just found this old tweet from Vitalik where he said, this was last year, Harberger taxes on NFTs are good. And then he pointed to Reddit post from a couple of years ago where he talked about how transfer fees are trivially circumventable with wrapper contracts. So in some way, would you say that Harberger taxes are almost like an alternative to royalties? Because there's been a pretty long conversation about royalties and NFTs. And I think people were anticipating that it would go one way and it didn't really turn out that way.
Yeah. One of the reasons I was excited about Web3 and wanted to get into the space was this idea of creator monetization. Obviously, the royalties conversation is complex and frustrating at times, but I think that's just one model to explore creator monetization, and I don't think there's been much exploration outside of that. Even subscription NFTs, there are standards that I think should be iterated on, but even subscriptions, you go to Patreon, you're buying an abstract digital concept of subscribing to this creator. And that's what NFTs are. They're abstract digital concepts of a discrete thing on the internet. And so Harberger taxes are just one way for creators to monetize something, whether or not that's useful for every type of content or discrete digital thing. Probably not. But I think that's a part of why it hasn't been adopted. It's hard to come up with a good value proposition for Harberger taxes. You need to create something that warrants this. I don't think it has to be recurring, but the common model is recurring fee.
So to be clear, just to make this set in stone, there's a version of using Harberger taxes with NFTs where, let's say I buy, an emo.eth fan NFT or whatever, and I think it's worth $1 million, so I set it at $1 million. There's a tax that I have to pay on that $1 million. Let's say it's 10%, which means I'd be paying $100,000 to you as the creator potentially. And then if anyone wants to buy it from me, there's sort of an open availability to buy that NFT at $1 million. And so that it creates this sort of subscription model via the tax, which is at 10% of whatever you value it at. But it also creates a much more efficient market where you actually have this appropriately valued NFT, whereas, right now it's floor prices just based on whatever, how much people are willing to hold it or not. Is that a fair way to sort of illustrate at least one way this could play out?
Definitely. I think, is it Eric Wall? They're a big Bitcoin proponents, but they kind of pioneered this concept of an orb. And now there are a few different orbs. And, what do you do with an orb? You contemplate it. And these are Harberger tax NFTs where I think they do... It might be monthly or it might be yearly, but basically a person has an orb and the holder of the orb can post a question on chain or maybe off chain. I think they post the question on chain, but then they can decide if they want the answer posted publicly or privately. But basically, you ask this person any question you want if you hold the orb. And so it has this recurring fee. If you want to ask another question next month, you need to still hold the orb. If someone thinks Eric Wall's insight is more valuable than you do, they're gonna buy the orb from you. It's hilarious. The model works for them, works for the folks that are using the orb. I think it could be a bit more elegant, probably. The fees are insane on it. It's like thousands of dollars a year, like 40%, 60%. I don't know. But, this is an actual useful thing that they're having fun with. And I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think an interesting dynamic here, which we see in royalties more broadly, and of course we've seen with OpenSea and Blur and everyone else over the last year or so, is just like, who is enforcing the fee? And are you able to work around it? So I'm curious in this realm of like not just royalties, but also something like taxes, Harberger taxes, where you do need that to be enforced. I'm curious how you think about where enforcement should be happening or where it can be happening. Like, is there an inevitability here where we're always going to cut out the fee? I'm curious how you think about that.
So I think enforcement has to happen on the token level. What that means for different tokens or different use cases can look like restricting to marketplaces that respect it as part of, protocol fulfillment. Yes, but that's still a decision that like the token logic needs to decide. What I like about Seaport is that it's very agnostic, and what I'm excited about for future versions of Seaport, especially zones with pre-hooks, is that it lets Seaport be agnostic while letting tokens implement their own rules that Seaport can defer to, like Harberger fee token or like a token like ERC721C. As part of fulfillment, like it can be the zone on the order. It can be the party that authorizes an order. And, as part of fulfillment, if there's a pre-hook on Seaport, it says, is this order okay? Should I go through with it? The token looks at the order as part of the call. It sees that it has these fees that it wants or any other restriction that it wants, any other intent it wants to see satisfied. And then it says yes, and it unlocks, and then, fulfillment happens. That's what I think. Like, it's really hard. The question for enforcement for Harberger tax, Harberger fee tokens is really the same one as the royalty one. It might be a little bit more guaranteed if it's like a recurring fee where, if you don't pay the recurring fee, then anyone can just take it from you. But in the meantime, you still have to worry about wrapping or clever ways to get around the rules that the token sets. So I think that the token kind of has to make the calls about when and how it's transferred.
So it sounds like standards are kind of the ultimate fallback. Like there's only so much that a social standard can do of like, hey, it would be really nice if you paid back the royalty that you're supposed to be paying. You almost need to kind of enforce that at more of a protocol level. Are there other standards that you would love to see that like don't exist yet? Or, we talked a little bit about like redeemables, dynamic traits. Is there anything else in this ballpark of like Harbinger taxes where you would like to see more structure built around it?
I've been meaning to dive more into the physical back token specs and just the subscription NFT specs. Subscriptions also have this problem of wrapping and who owns a token, who's authorized to, sign the message. I don't know. I want to explore more about those because I think both of those are very exciting. Physical back tokens kind of being the opposite of digital redeemables, where a digital thing unlocks maybe a physical thing or a digital experience, I think. Unlocking a experience, I guess it could also be digital or physical with a physical object using cryptography is pretty cool. I went to FWB Fest and BeadDAO was there, and if you made a lizard, you got a little tag which has a PBT on it, which is very exciting. I was very excited about that. So I have my bead lanyard lizard downstairs somewhere.
I love that. I'm also curious, when we talk about using zones more robustly to potentially think about enforcing some of this stuff and playing around with how that actually works, it feels like, and maybe this is wrong, but as zones become a more robust way to build in like basically more complex functionality and experiment with stuff, I would imagine that testing also becomes slightly more complex. So I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, testing is very complex. That's why we jumped from 1.1 to 1.5. The issues were around contract offers and zones and how this extra data or context gets passed to these smart contracts as part of fulfillment, whether it's the validate order call for zones or generate order or ratify order for smart contract offers. It's difficult. So with the 1.2 plus test suite for Seaport, invariant testing something as complex as Seaport and as wildly dimensional as Seaport orders, like Foundry invariant tests aren't really a good way to set up those orders, because really the only invariant Seaport has is it only moves tokens that an offer has signed to say, yes, I want to move these tokens, and it doesn't do that if the order's been canceled. So I've realized, like last night in a jolted awake, crazed eyes, that like what I've been trying to do, I think, the way we designed the 1.2 test suite is basically kind of like a exploration of the order space, the n-dimensional order space of Seaport orders. It's kind of a constraint satisfaction problem where, various features in this n-dimensional order space are valid depending on other features. And I remembered I did take a class where I learned about that in college.
Can you give like a quick TLDR on CSPs or constraint
CSPs,
satisfaction problems?
Yeah, it's kind of an AI thing where an agent needs to navigate a space or like play a game, and it needs to decide what its next move is. So it has to explore all of the possible permutations of next moves it could take. But then, if you're playing a game, there are only certain valid next moves based on all of the other features in the space. So that's the constraint part of it, and you want to solve for which are valid quickly, and that is the satisfaction part of the problem. And this is probably still too complex for like a testing framework, because you're not really transitioning from one like order state to the next. You just want to find a valid order and then populate it so you can make assertions about it when testing Seaport. So in that regard, it's less complex. I think the space is certainly less highly dimensional than like chess or Go. So that's good. I just want to do it without like brute force every possible permutation of like, is this a contract order? How much data is there? How many tokens is it trying to move? We want to just find find all of the possible orders. So the way we did it with 1.2, et cetera, is we sort of define these space enums, and then we just pick some random ones. I think we run it a few 100,000 times. And then we have like metrics to see what types of orders we filled, and we have pretty good coverage there. But I'm pretty sure there are millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of possible order combinations out there. And I would love to test them all.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And it kind of weirdly reminds me of Uniswap v4, where you do have like all of these different versions of what can happen. And honestly, like,
totally.
It's hard to say what people are going to do with it, because the market kind of finds the natural equilibrium or the natural optimal way for things to be. It does make me wonder, as we start to like kind of outsource some of this, I don't want to call it mechanism design because it's not really what it is, but like local sort of optimal points to the markets, essentially, I guess is a weird way to put it, whether this is going to need to become more common in testing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Seaport's especially complex due to how much like low-level assembly there is. If we could just copy memory regions and send them off to the next function and then, move on to the next memory region and use that, it would be much safer. These tests should still test everything, but, part of the complexity comes from the fact that Seaport's reusing the same memory regions for different stuff. Partly because Solidity is bad at copying memory regions, and just sheer bytecode size is against us there. But it's hard because, this testing framework is incredibly bespoke for Seaport and its needs. Hopefully there's always a market for people who know how to write good tests. And hopefully there's people willing to hire those people. But I think, Foundry, its fuzz testing framework, the more recent-ish invariant testing, there are definitely people building solutions out there that people are using. So that's great. And I'd love to figure out how to make more powerful things more generic if I get the chance to, but we'll see.
Totally. Yeah, I saw you had recently been opening some PRs to Foundry, so I wanted to ask about what your experience of that code base was like, and so you're learning a little bit of Rust. I want to hear about that.
Thanks for noticing. I'm very excited because I don't really know Rust, but I did go to the Paradigm at a Rust EVM day.
I was there as well.
Oh, nice. I'd been wanting to add some cheat codes to Forge, and I was like, all right, here, today's the day, might as well. And just kind of started hammering my head against it. But it's really interesting. Rust is weird. Still don't really know it, but I guess I know enough now to make a couple pull requests and fix some bugs that have been annoying me. It's really illuminating, and I'm really excited to keep learning more Rust so I can hopefully contribute to like Reth and stuff.
Yeah, that whole event and the talks there were definitely very exciting. It was just cool to see that Rust is actually getting kind of the attention that it deserves in this little niche of ours.
Yeah, it's great. I don't know any fast programming languages, so it'll be good to know one that is faster than Python.
Totally. Yeah. I also saw you had tweeted about recently trying out VS Code in Vim mode. What has your experience been?
It's been slow. I've only done it for about a few minutes. I learned some of the navigation commands, but I did print out this little cheat sheet that I went and color coded last night. So nice. I'm gonna tape this somewhere and try to get to it. But I basically used my keyboard to navigate everything, and that seems like the big selling point that people love Vim for. So hoping to get into it because I hate clicking on stuff. I really do.
Do it. Yeah, it's another little rabbit hole. But it like if your job is to put the text on the screen, you should know how to do that in the most optimal way possible, in my opinion. And I think Vim
totally is
the way to do it. Vim mode in particular with VS Code is that's my approach as well.
Yeah, I've been diving into like keyboard shortcut remappings and stuff. And so it's like, I should probably just learn Vim.
I think we probably have enough time to touch on Shipyard. I know that's something that you're working on.
Yeah.
What is Shipyard? It comes out of the OpenSea repo URL. So is it part of Seaport or is it completely disconnected?
Shipyard is sort of a suite of libraries and tools just to bootstrap repositories, bootstrap projects, hopefully some useful tools in there. It's been an interesting learning experience. My second Rust PR, which I put up like 30 hours ago, I realized Git submodules are a terrible way to handle dependencies generally, which is what Foundry is doing for now, unfortunately. But maybe not. Starting soon, TM ? Yeah, which is exciting. But anyway, want to be able to get ourselves and, hopefully other devs who want to build cool stuff up to speed on just deploying an NFT that works. Libraries to better integrate with Seaport zones, contract offers. Definitely still a work in progress. And learning the ins and outs and the pains of Foundry dependency management, templating. There's a bug with how templates are initialized. The Forge init -- template. I found a gnarly bug that I hope we can merge soon. It's those submodules. Again. This whole ecosystem is still very, very fresh. So it's fun and nice and very annoying to be at the cutting edge of just like, we want to make like a, create React app. And that might be hard to do given the current tooling. So maybe we need to make the tooling better.
Yeah, I think this is sort of the important work of trying to continuously elevate the status quo for new starting points in a project. How important do you think that is in particular within crypto? Because coming from a Web 2 background, that sort of stuff, it was like something that happened, but I didn't really pay too much attention to it. With the speed that crypto is moving, I just see so many different scaffold ETH style approaches to really just trying to improve the developer experience. How important would you say that is in crypto?
Definitely huge. Like I wouldn't be a smart contract dev if it weren't for dApp tools in Foundry. I just wouldn't. I don't like JavaScript config files. And, Foundry is still rough around the edges. There's still a lot of work to do there. Getting to V1, which is exciting, but still not a V1, still a nightly builds for Foundry. And I think, Paradigm's building all kinds of really awesome tools, or investing in really awesome tools. I haven't played much with, WAGMI and VM, but I hear they're good. People seem to be building cool stuff with them. That tooling seems like it's coming along pretty quickly, and it seems like it is smart, talented people working on it. And, and then I am also making a few PRs here and there. So that's exciting. I still think the wallet experience is the worst part. It needs to be easy to develop apps, but also you need to get people on to use the apps. So you gotta follow all paths to completion. But I'm excited about where the dev tooling is going. Now we just need, to get users where we can.
Yeah, we just had Tom and Jake from WAGMI and also
Nice.
VM and also Rivet on the pod, which will have come out the week before this. So yeah, excited about where that's going. I guess one question for you as we start to wrap things up. We talked about zones and we talked about making it easier for people to build NFT projects and all of that kind of stuff. It feels like there's some interesting explorations around building projects that also leverage things like zones and playing around with that design space. For people who are listening to this who are like, ooh, I think it would be worth experimenting and exploring Seaport, but want to sort of build on top of the sort of boilerplate NFT implementation, I'm curious what you're most excited about in terms of people experimenting. Like, what kind of experiments do you want to see done in this space?
Everything. I want to see it all. I think the most exciting part about seeing people experiment is just seeing people use it and figuring out what the pain points are, and there are a lot. I think we should, and hopefully are working on actively doing better around like documentation and resources for Seaport zones, etc. Definitely not there yet. So figuring out what those pain points are great. But I'm really excited about contract offers, especially. I think that's the most fully formed use case in the new Seaport. I think zones are super cool and super powerful, but I think we need to ship a 1.6, hopefully sooner rather than later, with this pre-hook for zones. I think that'd be great. And I think you could build very expressive, cool things on it. Even just ideas, stuff that you can't build right now. Like if you know what you want to build and it would be possible, I want to hear about that. If we can support it in a flexible, agnostic way, I would love to.
Making dreams come true. We love to see it.
Hopefully.
One final question for you before we wrap up, which we've been asking everyone at the end of these episodes, which is, what is one dev tool or library that you love that you want to shout out, or that maybe you think is underrated in the space?
If one kind of doesn't count. Cast, I think people don't use Cast enough. It's part of Foundry, so you probably have it installed, but I don't think you're using it to its full potential. You listening out there, it's really great. Just do a Cast -H and then memorize everything and then check back next week because they're going to add new stuff. They always do. That one is I say doesn't count because you already have it installed. Another one that's great is Heimdall. John Becker, I think, makes it. It's a bytecode analysis tool. It's great just for decompiling contracts. It's great for visualizing bytecode, jump graphs or whatever. And something that I forgot about until yesterday when I was looking at how different projects do like function selector lookup is that it has a ChatGPT integration where like you can give it call data and an open AI API key, and it will like explain what the call data does with a call to ChatGPT. So that's pretty sweet.
It's totally like the tool that I imagine the shadowy supercoders using.
Absolutely.
Love that. Cool. Well, this was so wonderful to have you on. Where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
You can find me at emo_eth on Twitter, X, I guess now.
No.
There's also a Seaport working group Discord that I actually don't know where the link is posted, so maybe I should just tweet it out at some point. Or if you can't find the link and you want it, DM me. I'll figure it out. Seaport Working Group, if you have questions about Seaport, if you want to build something at Seaport, if you are building something on Seaport, please let us know, because we're excited about that.
Cool. Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is so fun.
Appreciate you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.